From the Frankenstein Singularity by David Sandner. Chapter 1. The Lady of the Grand Palais d'Industrie. Kentish Town, 1838. Mary Shelley sat at her writing desk, thinking about the end of the world, pen poised until a drop of ink blotted the paper, when a knock sounded below at her front door. No one else was home. The cook and serving girl had gone to market, and her son was away at Cambridge. She would have to answer the door herself. She thought about not answering it, but knew without knowing how that something had come for her, that everything was about to change. She couldn't know what waited, the dying man and his extraordinary gift. Then, too close behind, a pair of assassins set to finish what they started. And finally another guest even more extraordinary than the others, come to summon her to an unimaginable destiny. None of this could be foretold at that moment, yet each sharp knock told her life had begun again. Still, she hesitated, brooding over the manuscript of her half-written story, The Mortal Immortal, about a man over 300 years old who had drunk an elixir mixed by Cornelius Agrippa and was cursed to live forever, while his beloved grew old and died. She considered the story a confession. For him, as for her, the world ended some time long before. Commissioned by the annual The Keepsake, she regretted leaving off when intuition told her she would not be able to return to it any time soon. She did not want to disappoint an editor who had shown faith in her. She glanced out her second-story window, but it did not overlook the front stoop, opening simply into a pale morning light shot through low clouds. She thought idly, again, one last time, of not answering the door, of refusing destiny. But when the knock came a third time, she hesitated no longer, but rose mid-sentence, made her way downstairs, and opened the door. She started to find a haggard man hunched in pain, left hand covering his belly, blood weeping between his fingers, staining his shirts under his great coat. He gripped a package the size of a bandbox, made of stiff cardboard wrapped with straps, wedged in under his left elbow, right hand raised to the door. Mary Shelley stepped out to him. Sweat beaded his forehead, though he shivered slightly as if chilled. He silently insisted she take the package, which she did. His dark-complected skin had faded to lily along his cheeks. His eyes, sunk in pain, unfocused. He swayed, his mouth forming words, but nothing came out. Neck muscles knotted with effort. He did not look English, perhaps Mediterranean. "Come," she said, alarmed, taking his right arm. "Come in." She reached out to touch his hand over his wound, staining her own fingers. She looked beyond and drew a breath to cry out to passer-by for help, but he shook his head, imploring silence, making inarticulate but unmistakably negative sounds. Why didn't he speak? Was he choking? No one on the mostly empty street seemed to notice them. He pushed a sleeve back and used his own blood as ink to make a mark on his left forearm that she knew all too well but had never thought to see again. A half circle lidded over a V, the sign of the Carbonari. Her friend Lord Byron had been a member of that secret society, bent on freedom for Italy from a corrupt Austrian empire. "Who is trying to kill you?" she said quietly, urgently. 16 years had passed since Percy Shelley had drowned off the coast of Tuscany. 16 years since she had lived in Casamagni above the sea, their last house together along the Tuscan coast. 16 years since she had been drawn into Italian politics with its intrigues and spies as she delved into her husband's murder. A murder she proved to her satisfaction but could never prove in a court of law. Though the world regarded his death as an accident, she had deduced the fatal secret, a story of betrayal as well as misfortune, only to find herself unable to act against the powerful forces that had committed it, forces that included members of her own country's government. Men at the highest ranks rankled by her husband's poetic indictments of them and worried about his radical influence on the powerful, mercurial Lord Byron, the most famous man in the world, had set in motion events that conspired to end his life. But no one could be held accountable. No Italian or English courtroom would bear testimony such as she had discovered, a case built of rumors, revelations by spies, and confessions by low men, including one who in the end remained her friend and Percy's, despite everything. When Mary moved to her house in Kentish Town, northwest of London, she supposed the Carbonari, active as ever in the cause of freedom, would never come to her again. Why should they? She had heard rumors of their activities throughout Italy and in Paris too, and surely their agents traveled at times to London, but she had left it all behind, though she continued sympathetic to their cause. She conceived of no service she could render the Carbonari, or any such groups, all now working in desperate secret. But when the man drew the mark on his arm, all came flooding back to her, and she did not hesitate any longer or ask questions. She took his arm and led him inside. She understood she must hide him immediately. As he staggered inside, the man touched the package smeared with blood that she held under her off arm. He still would not speak, and so pleaded with his entire body, tapping the package, folding his shoulders forward, indicating that this was more important than his ebbing life. She joined her hand again to his, clasped over the spreading stain on his shirt. She led him, partly lifting, partly pushing, upstairs to a side room used for guests, where a bed waited. But before she could heave him up, he folded to the floor with a sigh. He closed his eyes, laying on his back, his breathing shuddered and stentorian. What had happened to his voice? She knelt beside him, finding a pinprick and a dribble of blood at his throat. Her experience with spies in Italy made her suspicious. Poison from a needle, she wondered. Could it be? Is that what made the man's neck muscles cord and his frame shake, or was it the terrible wound in his stomach? Before she could pry his hand from the wound so that she might clean it, another loud knock shook her because she understood what it meant. Someone following the dying man. An opposing spy in the intrigues of the Carbonari, the assassin who had knifed and perhaps poisoned him. Were you followed? She whispered unnecessarily. The dying man did not answer. The knock came again, louder. She pushed the dying man's hand more firmly against his wound in a desperate hope to stop the bleeding. Time ran like blood through fingers as she sat back on her heels and tried to figure a way forward. No one was home. That was good. She would have welcomed allies, but feared there would be nothing they could do but be hurt or killed by what waited beyond the knock, which became a pounding. The banging roused the dying man, who opened his eyes, terrified, patting frantically at the package, imploring her. She nodded. She shoved it under the bed, deep among the boxes of her things. It was all she could do. She left the man and ran downstairs again, frantic to think how to prevent an assassin from coming in and finishing the work. Mary knew the problem with such a man knocking at her door was that the act itself implied another, an accomplice, breaking in at the back. Her adventures in Italy had taught her this much. She had just such a thing happen to her, a man coming through her door only to distract her as his accomplice climbed in a back window. But then Elby had appeared, and his bodyguard, the fearsome gondolier Tito Falsieri, and together the three of them had managed the affair. Now, so many years on, she was a lonely widow, Byron dead, alone in her house. But for the man dying in her spare bedroom at the top of the stairs. Because a man would even now be breaking in at the back, Mary knew that whether she answered the door or not would soon be irrelevant. So she determined in the moment she would open it fast and step out, crying for help. It was not much of a plan, but in her haste she saw no other. Mary opened the door hard to step forward, only to meet the man rushing in, pushing her back, with one hand closing the door behind him with the other, locking it. Her plan aborted. On reflection, she wondered she didn't try opening a window, but it felt like cowardice to step out of the path of the assassin on his way to the dying man. Nor would the door have lasted much longer in any case. She retreated into the room. The man looked Austrian at first blush, his pale face, cheeks marked livid red underneath the skin as if he were perpetually blushing, the cut of his jaw. All seemed so much what she expected. It was as if he were but a rendering in a book of the genus Austrian spy. He eyed the room while listening to the house. They both heard something crack in the back rooms of the house, and both knew what it was. Neither reacted. When he finally spoke, his accent confirmed her first impression. "Where is the bird?" "What bird?" she said, emboldened because her voice did not shake much. "Where's the carbonari?" The man pointed to a spot of blood on the floor and at her hand. He scanned the room again as if the man might be ensconced behind a curtain or under a chair. Shelley clasped her hands as if contrite. Both stood as if casually, ready to pretend it was but a social visit. Neither raised their voice, yet both, Shelley could see, swayed ever so slightly, as if ready to move, to run, and to chase. The cat and the mouse. "He left through a side window," she said. She turned her head at the sound of a window breaking from the back of her house. At the sound, the spy reached behind his back and drew forth a long knife tinged red. Pretense that this was anything but what it was fell away. Everything felt constricted to the moment, to the knife, and what would happen within the four walls of her house. Yell, she thought, yell, but she hadn't. She didn't. Why had she ever longed for anything but quiet? They both started in surprise when yet another great knock sounded behind the spy at her usually ignored front door. Mary knew his reaction meant that, unlike the man breaking the glass at the back, it was an unexpected visitor. Perhaps someone who saw something when the spy had pushed his way in and came to help. Mary Shelley, boomed a strangely stilted voice behind the door on her front step. It sounded more like Mary Shelley. Normally she would have found it disconcerting, but now it sounded too much like hope. "Come in," she shouted. At the same moment, the spy turned his head and said, "Too late. Go away." The door had been locked, but just as the assassin turned more fully to repeat his order and override her summons, the door itself tore inward off its hinges. Ducking his head, on which tilted an overlarge blue bicorn military hat trimmed with gold and plumed with a long ostrich feather, the Automan entered. The very Automan of London itself. The creature was, as she herself had written recently in her newly minted article on the thing for the London magazine, the next step in the refinement of the automata revolution, somehow at the service of the great thinking machine in the Grand Palais d'Industrie in Paris. He was called by most, ridiculously, Major General Clockwork Wagons, having been repurposed from a carnival attraction to his present state as a freely moving envoy of the lady of the Grand Palais. Before Mary penned her article about what she had called this fresh wonder of modern engineering, she had seen the creature only from afar on parade, beyond a crowd. Napoleon's wind-up soldiers had been a military failure at Waterloo, but a great leap forward in the making of artificial men. However, only this one and a twin in Paris, the alarming Laughing Sal, another repurposed sideshow attraction, out of all automata known, could, on their own power, seemingly without human intervention, to wind or power them in any way, move about at will, walking, talking, and some said deciding things for themselves. Mary found it a dubious claim, but smaller, more wind-up versions of automata servants were all the rage, delighting and terrifying in equal measure. 7 feet tall, a barrel chest, sturdy iron rods for arms, jointed with gears, it regarded Mary and her guest from a face below its hat, one large eye painted white with a pupil of lapis lazuli, the left eye covered by a monocle strapped to its undersized nose, 2 mutton-chop sideburns and thick eyebrows, all made of goat hair, as she learned for her article, and a triangular hole from which a voice emerged, painted over in a rather awkward grin, completed a disconcerting illusion of life. The thing paused, metronoming on its 2 bowed legs over the stabilizing back wheel, a flat iron hoop somewhat larger than a train wheel, rolling behind. No one had spoken for some moments. "Sorry about the door," it said, in a comic mechanical voice. "Don't know my own strength. We'll have it fixed in 2 shakes." The assassin stuttered. Attempting to open his hands in explanation or perhaps supplication, he realized he held a weapon, his long, bloodied knife. He looked at Mary and seemed to be waking to just how bad it looked for him. That no explanation would do, he formed an O with his mouth as if she would take pity on him. Perhaps he thought she would cover things up to protect the man dying upstairs, or in some sort of human communion against the metal thing before them. "This man is trying to kill me," Mary said, pointing at the assassin. She said it calmly, holding her arm out straight. "What have we here?" Major General Wagons said. "A knife? Is that blood?" The Automan hit the assassin with the door, leaving him flat out on the floor, unconscious. The knife rolled away to the far wall. The man sprawled, arms wide. Mary gogged only a moment. "There's another at the back," Mary said, breaking in.